argument against believing in Zeus. You think instead it's adequate to recognize that the arguments for believing in Zeus are not good arguments, and the evidence for believing in Zeus is not good evidence. We feel the same way, but about one more deity. That's the basic idea.
Proving non-existence is not, it's not necessary. It's sometimes impossible. How do you prove something isn't there? It's, Russell's teapot is an example. Prove there's not a teapot floating around in the universe. You can't really prove it's not there, but lacking sufficient evidence that it is there, that is the reason to disbelieve in it. Like Bill touched on, a popular quote, I contend that you and I are both atheists. You just believe in one more God than I do. And once you understand the reasons why you disbelieve all other gods, you understand the reason why we disbelieve in your God.
And you understand that some people make lust and fame and fortune their gods. The truth is we just believe in one more God than you do. It's a semantic game. We're not really atheists and you're not really theists. But first of all, the point that was brought up was this question of that absence of evidence somehow constitutes the evidence of the absence here. Let me just say something from Stephen Naylor Thomas, author and logician of Practical Reasoning and Natural Language. He says, in speaking of a fallacy, common textbook fallacy, says occurs in both of the following examples. There is insufficient evidence to establish that God exists, therefore God does not exist. And of course, there's no proof that God does not exist, therefore God exists. The reasoning in both these arguments is fallacious because ignorance or lack of proof or evidence about a claim establishes neither that it is true nor that it is false. So what about unicorns then? We say, absence of evidence of unicorns is sufficient. It's not that the absence of evidence for unicorns leads us to conclude that. It's that we have every reason to think that they don't exist, which is why we deny the existence of unicorns. But even if we adopt this sort of presumption of atheism, as it were, it seems like that, what we need to understand is and Michael Scriven argues this way as well, is that we have to have, there's an expectation of what sort of evidence there should be if a being were to exist. For example, let's say, I think that Carmen Electra is not in the room. Well, the absence of evidence for her being here, I think, would constitute good grounds. But what if I said Carmen's electrons are not in this room? Well, the absence of evidence then would not lead to that conclusion. So I guess what the question we would have to throw back to them is, if God exists, what grounds do you have for thinking there should be more evidence of him than one in fact exists?
Just to be clear, the claim is not that an absence of evidence is the same thing as evidence of absence. That's not the claim. The claim is that an absence of evidence makes it perfectly reasonable and perfectly rational not to believe in something, and that's basically how we get around in the world. I mean, that's just a basic form of reasoning, and it doesn't just apply to unicorns, it applies to a lot of things. And that's basically the argument. So it kind of comes down to the question of who's got the burden here. And my view is that when people make extraordinary existential claims that there's some supernatural event has taken place, or the claim that a supernatural being exists, then the burden is on them to provide sufficient arguments and evidence for that, and I just don't think that they have. But the burden isn't upon me to then, if they haven't provided adequate evidence and arguments for it, to then go show that it doesn't exist, to disprove that existence. That's not where the burden lies, and that's not where the burden lies for you with regard to Zeus, or unicorns for that matter. So it's just really a very simple epistemological point.
Yeah, I would say that, we're all born atheists about every single entity, right? You're an atheist about apples and bananas and the Eiffel Tower, and you're an atheist about everything. And then as you grow up and you develop, your senses and you begin to speak, your language, you develop ideas, you get evidence, and you start forming beliefs, okay? We form beliefs about, apples and bananas. We form beliefs about, at a certain point, Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, and we form beliefs about God, right? Okay, and then at a certain point, some of those beliefs, we have evidence to disbelieve them. Like, oh, wait a second, or we realize there's no evidence for them. Like, wait a second, the only reason I believed in Santa Claus was, well, because my parents told me there was Santa Claus and these presents were left under the tree at night. But now I realize, oh, my parents left them there. Okay, so then you lose that belief, okay? There's no reason to believe in God if you never have the evidence for it. So the only reason you believe in God is just because someone told you to believe in it, then you still don't have evidence for it, okay? You should still be an atheist in regards to that. You don't need a positive argument for every single deity proposed.
Yes, but
We'll give you guys the last word.
okay, I was just going to say that be careful not to confuse atheism with agnosticism, because I don't think that the default position of someone who's born, say, as a baby, is an atheist. Now, my daughter's, she has a pet lizard. The lizard's not an atheist. It has, you know, no propositional beliefs. So it would be fair to say that the lizard is neither.
Would you like, you looking at them like you want them to respond to that?
Oh, we're ready to move on. Let's do so.
If I might make one passing comment, though. There is scientific evidence in experiment to show that we are not atheists at birth. Now, I'm not speaking specifically of God, but there are, as it were, software hardwiring within the human brain at birth that leads us to think and believe certain things a certain way. I'm not going to get into the details.
That's that squishy brain stuff that you were talking about earlier.
Okay, I think we'll have time for one final question before we move on to the audience Q&A. We'll give about half the normal time to this question.
So this is actually just kind of picking up on this point, because we wanted to kind of emphasize how atheists are often sort of described as being overly skeptical, overly dismissive of the claims of people who claim to have witnessed supernatural events or claim to have witnessed miracles. And the suggestion is often the case that atheists are just overly skeptical. And the point we simply wanted to make is that it seems that most believers are skeptical as well when it comes to claims of the supernatural that are made by people of other religions. So this question is, how can a Christian dismiss the alleged witnessing of supernatural events and miracles and testimonials of communication with deities and so on in the case of so many non-Christian prophets and believers? After all, tons of people throughout history have claimed to have special communication with God or to perform miracles in support of their specific non-Christian religious beliefs. For example, Muhammad was alleged to have made the moon split as a sign of his special status with God. Christians tend to discount these claims, but in the case of a handful of Jews living 2,000 years ago, they take most of what they say about extraordinary supernatural events at face value. Doesn't it seem like there's a double standard at work here?
Well, I think that, first of all, just to clarify, one's having a predisposition, I don't think entails that, therefore, one has a double standard. I think that all of us, for various experiences and backgrounds, we have predispositions toward things, but whether we have evidence for those things is sort of a subsequent question. For example, atheists are likely to be critical and skeptical, highly skeptical of, say, theistic experiences of God. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay for someone to have a predisposition to be skeptical of one having an experience of God. But does that entail one has a double standard? Now, the onus is on me to suggest, well, then what is this sort of universal standard we might apply equally to the miracle claims? Well, let's consider then, what do we do here? Well, we have to employ the methods of historical inquiry when we're talking about source material about events that happened many years ago. We have to rely upon higher criticism, like form criticism, or source criticism. We have to sift through the controversial aspects of how can we identify something as being authentic. And historians have various criteria by which they try to